The child stirred softly, a tiny sigh leaving her lips, unaware that her very existence had saved her mother from despair. Serafina pressed her cheek against the baby's warm skin, tears slipping silently into the blanket. "You will never feel the emptiness I felt," she whispered. "I'll make sure of it. You will only know love." Her words trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything she had endured. A husband who once swore eternity, a love that once felt invincible, and a betrayal that nearly crushed her spirit. Alaric Monroe was once the man who made Savannah stop and stare. A self-made success, every inch of him spoke of power and polish. To the world, he was untouchable. To Serafina, he had once been the man who kissed her hands by firelight, the man who vowed that no riches would ever matter as much as her smile. But somewhere between the whispers of temptation and the hunger for more, he forgot. And when he forgot, he shattered not only vows, he shattered a woman's soul. What would you do if the person who promised to protect your heart was the very one who broke it? Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to watch them slip away into the arms of another? This is not just a story about wealth, nor is it simply about betrayal. It is about the fragile strength of the human heart, about the way one choice can burn a world to ashes, and the way one child can rebuild it again. Friends, before we begin this journey of heartbreak and healing, let me welcome both old and new souls to Mr. Ross Story Trail. If you believe that love and forgiveness still carry power in today's world, I invite you to like this video, share it, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that matter. Tonight, you will witness a love once beautiful, tested by temptation, and rescued not by grand gestures, but by the cry of a newborn. Before the tears, before the ache of betrayal, there was once a love that could silence a crowded room. Serafina Vale was not draped in diamonds, nor did she arrive with a name that commanded respect. She was a school teacher, her life simple, her joy found in children's laughter and in well-worn books she read by candlelight. When Alaric Monroe first laid eyes on her, he was surrounded by glittering guests and flashing smiles, but none of it mattered. She was the quiet flame at the edge of the room, the kind of flame a man could not look away from. He watched the way she leaned in when an elderly woman spoke, how her laughter floated without pretension, and something in him shifted. This was not the hunger of conquest or the thrill of status. This was the beginning of something rare, a love that felt honest. Their courtship was tender yet powerful, as though the city itself paused to watch them walk hand in hand along the riverbank. Alaric, once a man who measured his life in profits, began to measure it in moments with her. He kissed her fingers as though each one carried a prayer, and in return, she gave him a love untainted by wealth. The night he asked her to be his bride, lanterns glowed above them, and her whispered yes seemed to echo through the trees. Guests wept at the vows, for they were not promises of fortune, but of faith. Faith that love could last, even against the weight of the world. Yet, love is not always destroyed in a storm. Sometimes it is chipped away slowly, until the one you trust most becomes the one who leaves you bleeding. For a time, their marriage was the kind of love story people whispered about. Breakfasts in bed, with flowers from the garden, evenings by the fire where a glance carried more weight than words. To Serafina, every gesture said, "You are my only one." To Alaric, her presence made the world feel less hollow, less consumed by ambition. But success draws eyes, and not all eyes look with kindness. As Alaric's empire expanded, so did the temptations circling him. Lavish parties, flashing smiles, promises of pleasure with no cost, or so it seemed. He told himself he was stronger than all of it, that no distraction could break the bond he had with the woman who gave him more than money ever could. Yet temptation does not arrive like a storm. It seeps quietly, eroding conviction, turning certainty into hesitation. One dinner led to another, one smile lingered too long. And soon the vows spoken under lantern light felt distant, as though they belonged to another lifetime. Serafina felt it before she ever knew the truth. The subtle absence in his touch, the way his laughter no longer reached his eyes, the silence between them that used to be comfortable, now heavy and cold. This is where our story begins, with a love pure enough to stir envy, and a betrayal sharp enough to nearly destroy it. But what neither of them knew was that a child, innocent, unasked, for, and yet destined, would hold the power to change everything. So stay with me, for this journey will test every fiber of your heart. It will hurt, it will heal, and it will remind us all that forgiveness, though costly, is sometimes the only road to peace. Savannah breathed with a rhythm of its own. The streets were lined with oak trees that arched like guardians, their branches heavy with moss that swayed gently in the southern breeze. Riverboats glided slowly across the water, their horns echoing like lullabies at dusk. It was in this city, where time seemed slower, softer, that Alaric Monroe first laid eyes on Serafina Vale. He had walked into the ballroom of one of his hotels that evening surrounded by guests who dressed in brilliance, their laughter carrying ambition more than joy. He was used to attention. People often leaned toward him, eager to catch his eye, hoping his wealth and influence might spill into their lives. But his gaze drifted past the glitter and landed quietly on her. Serafina stood at the back, speaking to an elderly woman about a book they had both cherished. There was no attempt to shine, no calculated gesture to draw admiration. She carried herself with grace so natural that it unsettled him. While others chased the room's approval, she seemed content in her little corner, her laughter light and unforced. That night, Alaric could not keep from seeking her out. He introduced himself, but for the first time in years his polished charm seemed unnecessary. She did not gasp at his name. She did not flatter him with rehearsed admiration. Instead, she asked him about the novel she held, and for reasons he could not explain he found himself leaning closer, listening as though her voice mattered more than the sound of his own. Their conversations became a rhythm. Coffee in quiet cafes, walks by the river as the sun lowered itself into the horizon. She would bring stories of her students, small joys that lit her face brighter than diamonds ever could. He would share his ambitions, but for the first time, he noticed himself speaking, less about profit and more about dreams, about belonging, about home. Theirs was not a romance born of grand gestures, but of sincerity, and it was that sincerity that drew him deeper, until he realized that for the first time in his life, wealth was not what made him rich, it was her presence. Their courtship unfolded with the quiet certainty of dawn. Alaric learned the rhythm of Serafina's days, the way she kept a small notebook of quotes tucked in her bag, the way she paused to speak kindly to hotel staff who rarely received more than a nod. She taught him to linger, to listen. He, in turn, opened doors she never asked to enter, evenings at small galleries, a reserved corner at her favorite cafe, a bench by the river where the world seemed to hush whenever she rested her head on his shoulder. He had known attraction before. This was different. It was the grace of being truly seen. When she laughed at one of his rare, unguarded jokes, he felt something settle inside him, a calm he hadn't realized he had been missing. The proposal came on a warm evening beneath a canopy of trees strung with soft lights. He led her down a narrow path lined with mason jars glowing like captured stars. A violinist played a gentle melody somewhere out of sight. She didn't gasp at the display. She looked at him. Only him. That was all he needed. Alaric's voice was low, steady. I have built many things with my hands and ambition. None of it matters if I cannot build a life with you. He didn't kneel to impress a crowd. He knelt because that was where his heart told him to be, humble, hopeful, certain. When he opened the small velvet box, the diamond did not scream wealth, it whispered devotion. Serafina's reply was a breath and a vow all at once. Yes, they chose a wedding that felt like truth, not theater. Close friends, family, and a few elders from her school gathered beneath those same trees at sunset. Her gown was simple, a river of silk that moved as she walked. He wore a tailored suit with a white rose pinned just above his heart. When she reached him, her hand slid into his, and the tremble in his fingers steadied. Their vows were short. Hers spoke of choosing him in the quiet moments, when life offered no applause. His promised protection, not from hardship, but from indifference. To show up with tenderness, even when success demanded his attention. As they exchanged rings, a hush spread, not the hush of expensive ceremony, but the hush of souls agreeing, this is right. They danced on a wooden platform set in the grass. No grand choreography. He counted softly against her ear, guiding her with a patience that made her smile. When the song ended, he kissed her with a reverence that moved a few guests to tears. There were toasts, but they were not about numbers or names, they were stories, the way she tutored a struggling student after hours, the way he once bought an elderly couple dinner and slipped away before they could thank him. Later, away from the gathering, he lifted her veil and studied her face, as if committing it to memory. You are my home, he said, the words quiet and unforced. Her reply was a hand over his chest and a breath that matched his own. They were not pretending to be perfect. They were promising to be present. As night settled, lanterns swayed gently overhead. The last notes of the violin faded, but the warmth remained. Two hearts had chosen each other without spectacle, certain of the road ahead, not because it would be easy, but because it would be shared. Marriage did not sweep them into spectacle, it carried them into softness. In the quiet mornings, Alaric would rise before dawn and slip into the kitchen. He had never been skilled with stoves, yet he insisted on cooking for her. His attempts produced pancakes in odd shapes, uneven at first, until he learned to pour the batter carefully into hearts. He would set the tray with fresh flowers clipped from their garden, balancing it carefully as he brought breakfast to her bedside. Serafina would wake to the sight of him grinning sheepishly, proud of his crooked creations. She never laughed at him, she kissed him, whispering, "It's perfect, because it's you." In return, she left him reminders of her love hidden in the corners of his world. A folded note in his briefcase, "You are more than your work." A slip of paper tucked beneath his pillow, "Come home to me tonight." He would find them when he least expected, and each one felt like a hand reaching across distance, grounding him. One evening after a long day filled with contracts and phone calls, Alaric walked into their home to find Serafina curled by the fire, a book resting on her lap. She looked up and smiled. That smile erased the fatigue from his shoulders. Without a word, he crossed the room and knelt before her. He took her hand, kissed the back of it as though she were a queen, and then leaned his forehead against her palm. That night, their love unfolded in tenderness. There was no rush, no performance, only reverence. He traced the lines of her face as if memorizing them for eternity. Her hands moved across his back slowly, deliberately, as though she were stitching his soul together. Their kisses lingered, unhurried. Their embrace was quiet but complete, a union of body and spirit, a whisper of eternity in the stillness of their room. When they lay together afterward, Serafina pressed her face to his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "This," she whispered, "is all I need." He tightened his arms around her, whispering back, "And I would give up everything I own before I let go of this." Those who saw them in the days that followed swore they were witnessing a love rare. In the world, the kind that softened sharp edges and steadied restless souls. Their marriage was not loud, but it was luminous, glowing in gestures that outsiders might overlook yet held the very essence of devotion. Their home soon became a sanctuary of little rituals, not grand, not loud, but sacred in their consistency. On weekends, Serafina would coax Alaric into the kitchen, insisting they bake together. He fumbled with flour and sugar while she teased him gently, her laughter ringing through the room like music. He would lean across the counter, smudging flour across her cheek just to see her feign outrage, and she would chase him with a spoon in hand until they collapsed into laughter. Those who had known Alaric in his relentless, polished world could hardly recognize this. Softer man, apron crooked, grinning as though nothing outside their kitchen mattered. In the evenings, Serafina would sit on the porch swing with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Alaric would join her, the weight of the day finally falling away as she nestled against him. They spoke not of deals or deadlines, but of dreams, the names they might give future children, the kind of garden she wanted to plant, the trips they would take when life allowed. Under the quiet of starlight, the future felt certain, glowing before them like a path they would walk together hand in hand. It was not only romance that defined them, but kindness in the smallest acts. When she stayed late at school, tutoring a child who struggled with reading, he would surprise her by waiting outside the classroom, ready to carry her books. When his meetings stretched late into the night, she would leave a lamp burning by the window, so he would see it the moment he turned onto their street, a beacon saying, "I'm here, come home to me." For Alaric, the world's applause grew quieter. For Serafina, her modest life blossomed into a haven of joy she had never dared to imagine. Together, they created a rhythm that was tender and true. But love, no matter how deep, is not always safe from the storms of human weakness. For now, though, they lived in the warmth of promise, believing that what they had built could endure anything. And as we linger in this moment, their hands entwined, their laughter echoing against the hush of night, let me ask you, dear friends, do you believe true love can exist beyond money and status? If your answer is yes, write it boldly in the comments below. Because for Serafina and Alaric, love was never about fortune or reputation. It was about presence, tenderness, and the sacred promise of always choosing each other. The night began like so many others in Alaric Monroe's world, polished, deliberate, and brimming with faces that cared less for friendship and more for fortune. He had grown used to these gatherings, the glitter of jewelry, the murmur of investment deals, the endless toasts to success. They were meant to celebrate him, yet they always felt hollow. His heart was rarely in them, for he longed for something softer, the glow of Serafina's lamp waiting at home, the sound of her laughter when he walked through the door. But that night, something shifted. She walked in with a presence that turned heads before her name was even whispered. Celestine Duval. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was not beauty alone that made her dangerous. It was the way she carried herself, as though the room belonged to her, as though every eye should bend to her command. Where Serafina's charm was quiet grace, Celestine's allure was boldness wrapped in silk. She thrived in the spotlight, each gesture calculated, each smile sharpened to captivate. Their eyes met across the room. Hers did not flinch or soften. They dared him to notice, dared him to imagine. And though he looked away quickly, the image remained. Later that evening, she approached him with ease, congratulating him on his latest success. Her words were smooth, her voice low and deliberate. When her hand touched his in greeting, it lingered, just long enough to leave an impression. Alaric drew back politely, reminding himself of who he was, of the vows spoken under lantern light, of Serafina's face as she said yes. That night he returned home and kissed his wife softly as she slept. For a moment, it quieted his restlessness. He told himself that nothing could move him from her side. But temptation seldom arrives with thunder. More often, it slips in quietly, disguised as chance encounters. In the weeks that followed, Celestine's presence seemed inescapable. At luncheons, she found her way to his table. At business meetings, her gaze lingered longer than necessary. Each interaction felt harmless in isolation, yet together they began to chip away at his resolve. At first, Alaric resisted with conviction, but conviction tested too often without reinforcement can begin to wear thin. And Celestine knew how to test. Celestine was relentless, though never obvious. She did not chase. She allowed herself to be found. At each business gathering, she positioned herself where he could not help but notice. Her laughter was always a little louder when he entered the room. Her compliments always crafted to touch more than his achievements. One evening, at a networking dinner, she leaned close enough for her perfume to cling to his jacket. "You work too hard, Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice brushing against his ear. "A man like you deserves more than contracts and deadlines. You deserve indulgence." He straightened in his chair, every muscle taut. He reminded himself of Serafina's smile, of the way she pressed her cheek against his chest at night, as if it was the safest place in the world. "I have everything I need at home," he replied firmly, though his tone betrayed a crack, not in loyalty, but in the ease with which he carried it. Celestine's lips curved. She didn't argue. She simply let silence do the work, a silence heavy with suggestion. At home, Serafina noticed. It was not in what he said, but in what he no longer said. He used to return from work eager to recount the details of his day, the triumphs, the setbacks, even the small annoyances. Now he grew quieter. His answers clipped. "Just a long day," he would say, kissing her forehead instead of her, lips moving through the house as though carrying an invisible weight. She tried to brush it away, telling herself all men grew weary under the strain of business. But late at night, when he slipped from their bed to take calls in another room, her heart stirred uneasily. She would watch the doorway, whispering to herself, "Please, let me be wrong." Alaric, meanwhile, fought an invisible battle. He told himself he was not interested, that he would never dishonor the woman who had trusted him with everything. Yet he found himself thinking of Celestine when he shouldn't, recalling her laughter, the curve of her gaze. He hated himself for it, yet the thought returned unbidden, persistent as a shadow. Temptation rarely appears as betrayal in the beginning. It comes disguised as flattery, as companionship, as opportunity. And with each passing encounter, Alaric's defenses grew weaker, while Serafina's heart sensed a storm she could not yet name. The first time it crossed a line, it seemed harmless. A late-night meeting had stretched longer than expected, and when the other guests drifted away, Celestine lingered. She suggested a quiet dinner to discuss business in peace. Alaric hesitated, glancing at his watch, thinking of Serafina waiting at home with supper cooling on the table. But instead of declining, he found himself nodding. The dinner was filled with conversation that danced dangerously between professional and personal. Celestine spoke of dreams, of freedom, of a life without restraint. She asked him about his childhood, about regrets, about the pieces of himself he never shared in boardrooms. Her gaze was unwavering, pulling at threads he had always kept hidden. When the evening ended, there was no touch, no kiss, only the echo of intimacy that had no place outside his marriage. That night, he returned home late. Serafina had left the lamp burning in the window, just as she always did. She had fallen asleep on the couch, her book resting loosely in her hands. The sight pierced him with guilt so sharp he could hardly breathe. He lifted her gently, carried her to bed, and kissed her forehead. She stirred, whispering his name, but he could not bring himself to confess where he had been. The pattern began to repeat. Meetings stretched later, dinners blurred into private conversations. Each time he told himself it was only talk, that he had not crossed into betrayal. Yet deep inside, he knew he was walking toward a line he once swore he would never approach. Serafina, though unaware of the details, felt the widening gap. She noticed the way his laughter no longer lit his eyes, the way he seemed restless even in her embrace. She tried to reach him with her quiet tenderness, leaving notes in his briefcase as she once did. Cooking his favorite meals, brushing his hair back when he leaned wearily at the dinner table. But her gestures no longer stirred him as they once had. He was present, but his mind was elsewhere, haunted by choices he had, not yet made, tempted by promises he should never have entertained. Nights grew heavier. Serafina would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she had gone wrong. Was her love not enough? Had she failed to keep his heart? She prayed in silence, her hands clasped tight, asking for strength she wasn't sure she possessed. Alaric's world was splitting quietly in two, the home that grounded him and the temptation that threatened to consume him. And though no one else could see it, Serafina could feel it. A wife knows when her husband's soul begins to slip away. Alaric told himself it was only conversation, only dinners, only moments stolen from the night. But each step made the next easier. Celestine knew exactly how to keep him lingering. She leaned across the table when she spoke, her perfume clinging to his jacket long after he left. She laughed at his stories as though they mattered more than anything in the world. And when silence hung between them, she filled it with promises of freedom, of excitement, of a life unchained by responsibility. One evening she pressed her hand lightly over his. He didn't pull away immediately. That hesitation, a pause no one else witnessed, was the quiet betrayal that marked the beginning of his fall. At home, Serafina felt the shift, not in grand gestures but in the details. His tie carried a faint scent that wasn't hers. His phone lit up with messages he turned face down. His embraces grew shorter, his eyes less steady when they met hers. She asked once, softly, her voice trembling, "Are you tired of me?" Alaric's chest tightened. "No," he said quickly, forcing a smile, but the denial rang hollow even in his own ears. She tried to trust him. Love had always been her anchor, and she clung to it even as her knuckles turned white. But her heart, tender and discerning, told her what her mind refused to accept, the man who once counted. The freckles on her cheeks, as though they were constellations, now carried someone else's gaze in his eyes. Nights grew colder. Supper grew lonelier. She would wait by the window, lamp burning, whispering prayers into the dark. When he finally came through the door, his kiss was hurried, his steps heavy, his excuses always the same, just another long meeting. Alaric's guilt swelled, yet so did his weakness. He returned to Celestine because she made him feel invincible, because she praised the parts of him that Serafina had never cared to feed, ambition, conquest, indulgence. He hated himself for it, yet he went back. And with every choice, he drifted further from the woman who had once been his entire world. The night she found it, the house was quiet. Alaric had returned late again, his footsteps hurried, his explanations vague. He draped his jacket over the chair before retreating to the study, saying he needed to review some papers. Serafina moved to tidy the dining room, her hands working mechanically, though her heart pressed heavily in her chest. She had grown used to the distance, the silences that seemed to multiply between them. But that evening, something urged her to linger near his jacket. As she reached for it, her fingers brushed against the pocket. A folded envelope slipped to the floor. Her breath caught. She picked it up slowly, as though it might burn her hands. The paper carried a faint fragrance, not her own. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded it. The words leapt from the page with a cruelty sharper than any blade. "You make me feel alive in ways no one else can. I crave every stolen moment. Say the word, and I am yours completely." The signature was Celestine's. The scent was hers too, sweet and deliberate. Serafina's knees weakened. She sank into the nearest chair, the letter trembling in her hands. For a moment she could not breathe, could not think. The man who once whispered vows of loyalty beneath lantern light had allowed another woman to write her name across his life. Tears blurred her vision, spilling freely. She pressed her hand to her mouth, silencing the sob that threatened to escape. The weight of betrayal crushed her chest, leaving her gasping for air. Her thoughts spiraled. Was I not enough? Did my love mean so little? She remembered the nights she stayed awake, waiting with a lamp burning. She remembered the notes she had left in his briefcase, the meals she had cooked, the prayers whispered into the silence. All of it, swept aside for another's touch. She sat in that chair for hours, staring at the letter, waiting for him to emerge from the study. But when he did, she could not confront him. Not yet. Her voice had deserted her, leaving only tears and the hollow ache of knowing. That night, she lay beside him in bed, her body still, her heart broken. His breathing deepened as he drifted into sleep. She turned her face into the pillow, clutching it to muffle her cries. For the first time since their vows, she no longer recognized the man lying beside her. Morning light spilled into the room, soft and golden, yet to Serafina it felt cruel. She rose quietly, leaving Alaric still asleep, the letter hidden beneath her pillow where she had clutched it all night. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. Her eyes were swollen, her lips pale, her face carrying the weight of 1,000 questions with no answers. She held the letter again, reading the words until they carved themselves into her heart. There was no denial left to cling to, no excuse strong enough to erase what she saw in Celestine's handwriting. The betrayal was no longer suspicion, it was truth, inked on paper and perfumed with arrogance. When Alaric appeared in the kitchen later, dressed impeccably as always, she studied him in silence. He kissed her cheek absently, poured his coffee, and spoke of meetings ahead. His voice was the same, his manner was the same, but to Serafina, everything had changed. She heard emptiness in his tone, distance in his words. Her fingers tightened around the letter hidden in her sleeve. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why her love, so steady, so tender, had not been enough. But the words stuck in her throat. Betrayal does not always ignite fury at first. Sometimes it silences, paralyzes, and leaves a person trembling on the edge of collapse. All day, she carried the letter like a secret flame burning against her skin. Every time she glanced at him, guilt painted across her chest in new colors. She remembered their vows, their dances beneath lantern light, his hands cradling hers with reverence. Had all of it been a lie, or had it simply died quietly, replaced by promises he whispered to another? That night, she placed the letter on the table in front of her, waiting for him to come home. The clock ticked steadily, each second sharpening her resolve. Tears no longer blurred her vision. They had been replaced by clarity. This time, she would not remain silent. This time, she would look him in the eye and force him to confront the truth he had tried to hide. The door opened. His footsteps echoed across the floor. He called her name lightly, unaware of the storm gathering in her chest. Serafina straightened her back, the letter resting beneath her hand. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady when she whispered to herself, "Tonight, he will face what he has done." The stage was set. The confrontation was inevitable. Have you ever seen someone risk everything for temptation? Share your thoughts. Would you forgive, or would you walk away? The letter lay on the table between them like a blade, silent yet merciless. When Alaric entered the room, his eyes immediately fell upon it. For a moment, his steps faltered. His carefully constructed composure cracked ever so slightly, enough for Serafina to see the truth written across his face. Her hands trembled as she rose, tears glistening in her eyes. "Why, Alaric?" Her voice was not loud, it was broken, fragile. "Was I not enough? Did my love mean so little to you?" He reached for her, his lips parting as if to explain, but no words could mend the wound already carved. "Serafina, Don't," she whispered sharply, pulling back. "Do not insult me with excuses. I gave you everything, my trust, my heart, my soul, and you gave it away." Her tears fell freely now, streaming down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking with the weight of betrayal. Alaric lowered his head, shame pressing down upon him, yet he could not summon the courage to meet her gaze. "Do you know what it feels like," she continued, her voice rising with anguish, "to build a life around someone, only to discover that you are living in the shadow of another woman? Every night I waited for you, praying you would come home to me. I lit the lamp in the window, Alaric, and all the while, you were lighting your heart somewhere else." He stepped forward, his hand hovering, desperate to touch her, to reassure her. It was a mistake. Her sob cut through the air like a strike. A mistake? You do not fall into another woman's arms by mistake. You chose her, over me, over us. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Alaric's throat tightened, but he found no defense. No apology strong enough to erase the truth that now stood naked between them. Serafina's breath shook as she sank into the chair, her face buried in her hands. The woman who once glowed with laughter now trembled beneath the weight of betrayal. Her spirit cracked, her trust shattered. Alaric stood frozen, a man stripped of the illusion of control, confronted by the very pain he had inflicted. Yet he remained silent, his shame louder than any words. The confrontation left a silence in the house so heavy it pressed against every wall. Alaric buried himself in work, staying away longer, returning with apologies she no longer believed. Serafina moved through the rooms like a shadow of herself, her laughter gone, her gentle songs silenced. At night, she lay awake, her pillow damp with tears. She turned toward the space beside her, where once he reached for her hand in the dark and found it cold, empty. Sometimes she would whisper into the stillness, her voice trembling, "Why wasn't I enough? What did she give you that I couldn't?" But the silence never answered. Days blurred into each other. She stopped, leaving notes in his briefcase. The flowers in the vase wilted, untouched. Meals went uneaten. She tried to hold her composure in public, wearing polite smiles at the market or when greeting neighbors, but behind closed doors her body would fold beneath the weight of grief. She wept until her chest ached, until her eyes stung, until exhaustion silenced her. Her friends noticed the dimming of her light. "Are you well, Serafina?" they asked gently. She nodded, forcing her lips to curve. She couldn't bring herself to confess the truth, to let the world know that the man she had trusted with her soul had broken it. One evening, she sat before the fire with her hands clasped so tightly they shook. The flames blurred through her tears as she whispered to the emptiness around her, "I gave him everything, everything, and he threw it away." Alaric returned home to see her like this once, her body trembling, her eyes swollen, her spirit bruised. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to apologize until words meant something again. But when he stepped closer, she looked at him with a mixture of love and devastation so raw that he stopped in his tracks. The distance between them had never felt wider. Serafina's nights became a rhythm of grief, weeping until her body surrendered, to restless sleep, waking to an emptiness she could not fill. She was living beside him, yet she felt abandoned, discarded, unseen. For the first time since their vows, she no longer felt like his beloved. She felt like a stranger in her own marriage. The days weighed heavy, pressing Serafina into a silence she feared she might never escape. Her body carried her through the motions of life, but her spirit felt fractured. She prayed for answers, for a reason to rise from her bed, for something that could anchor her when her heart longed to drift away. One morning she felt a sudden wave of weakness wash over her. She pressed her hand to her chest, steadying herself against the counter. The room spun, and she sank into a chair, her breath unsteady. At first, she thought it was exhaustion from nights without sleep. But when the same weariness came again the next day, followed by a queasy restlessness, she felt a possibility stir in her mind. With trembling hands, she visited the town physician. He listened kindly, examined her, and then smiled with a gentleness that reached her heart. "You are expecting, Mrs. Monroe." The words struck her like lightning, not in fear but in awe. For a moment, she could not speak. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of something deeper. A spark, a reason. When she returned home, she closed herself in their bedroom and sat upon the bed, her hands resting against her stomach. "A child," she whispered. "Our child." Her tears flowed freely, but they no longer hollowed her. This time they carried strength. She thought of the letter, of Alaric's betrayal, of the nights she cried into her pillow. And then she thought of the life within her, fragile, innocent, untainted by the world's cruelty. In that moment she made a vow, one she whispered into the quiet. "I may be broken, but I will not let this child be born into despair. You will know love, little one. Even if I must carry it alone, you will know love." For the first time in weeks, she rose with steadiness. She prepared herself a simple meal and ate it slowly, nourishing not only her body but the life that depended on her. The grief was still there, sharp and aching, but now it was joined by something stronger, purpose. That night, she lay in bed beside Alaric. She did not tell him yet. She simply rested her hand over her stomach, a faint smile touching her lips through the shadows. The man beside her might have shattered her heart, but the child within her gave her reason to keep breathing, to keep fighting. The secret of her pregnancy became her quiet strength. In the mornings, when grief threatened to steal her will, she pressed her hand against her stomach and whispered, "I'm still here, and I will be strong for you." Her tears did not vanish, but they carried a different weight now. They were no longer the tears of a woman defeated, but of a mother who refused to let sorrow write the story of her child's beginning. She began to move with a sense of care, eating well, resting when her body demanded, and praying not only for healing but for courage. Alaric noticed small changes, though he could not yet name them. He saw her lifting her chin more often, her shoulders straighter, even when her eyes were red from crying. He heard her humming softly in the kitchen one morning, a fragile melody he hadn't heard in weeks. He wanted to ask what had changed, to step close and rediscover the warmth he once knew. But shame kept him at a distance, chained by the memory of Celestine's touch and the hollow choices he had made. At night, Seraphina lay awake, thinking of the child's future. She imagined tiny hands reaching for hers, a laugh echoing through their halls, the sound of feet running across wooden floors. Those images became her lantern in the dark, reminding her that even in betrayal, life could still bloom. But there were moments of fear, too. She questioned whether she could raise a child in a house divided, whether forgiveness could ever stitch her heart back together. The sight of Alaric, sitting in silence across the table, was a daily reminder of the fracture between them. Sometimes she longed to tell him, to share the news, to watch his face soften as it once did. Other times she vowed to keep it to herself, certain he no longer deserved to share in her hope. Yet, one truth burned brighter than her doubt. The child was innocent. The child was hers to protect, to cherish, to shield from the mistakes of adults. And that truth gave her the courage to breathe again. As she sat alone one evening, her hands folded gently over her stomach, she whispered, a question into the quiet air, not to Alaric, not to the world, but to herself. What would you do? Give up on love, or fight for the child's future? Seraphina could not hold the secret forever. The child within her was growing, and with each passing week, her body began to show the faintest curve of life. She had hidden it beneath flowing dresses, moving quietly through the house, but one evening, when the weight of fatigue pressed too heavily, she could not disguise it anymore. Alaric found her in the garden, sitting beneath the shade of a tree, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. He froze. For a moment, the world stilled. His chest tightened as his mind raced to grasp what his eyes had already seen. "Seraphina," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're—" She lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes clouded with both sorrow and defiance. "Yes," she said simply. "I carry your child." The words struck him harder than any accusation, harder than the night she had confronted him with Celestine's letter. This was not anger. This was truth, raw and undeniable. Alaric stumbled back a step, his breath uneven. 1,000 thoughts crashed through him, guilt, fear, wonder, and a longing he had not felt in months. He saw in her eyes the love she once offered so freely, now guarded like a fortress. And still, within that fortress, a new life stirred. He sank to his knees before her, his hands hovering, trembling, before resting gently atop hers. His voice cracked. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. But this child, Seraphina, I want to try. Please let me try." Her eyes filled with tears, though not of forgiveness. Not yet. "You broke me, Alaric. Do you think a child erases betrayal?" "No," he admitted, his voice thick. "But maybe she can teach me what I've forgotten. Maybe she can give me the courage to become the man you once believed I could be." Seraphina turned her face away, unwilling to show the depth of her heartache. But something inside her shifted as she heard his words. Not trust, not yet, but for the first time since the betrayal, she saw a flicker of the man who had once held her hand beneath the lanterns and promised her forever. The silence between them stretched, heavy but alive, and within it, the smallest heartbeat, unheard yet powerful, began to change everything. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet tension. Seraphina moved cautiously, her trust still fractured, but Alaric began to change in ways she had not expected. He no longer lingered at his office or arrived home with vague excuses. Instead, he rearranged his days, carving out time for appointments, for rest, for her. The first time he accompanied her to the physician, she was surprised. She had not asked him to come, yet there he was, waiting by the door when she picked up her bag. She walked past him in silence, but when he gently took the bag from her hands, she allowed it. In the waiting room, he sat close, his eyes fixed on her rather than his phone. When the physician placed the stethoscope over her belly and smiled, there it is. The heartbeat. Alaric's face broke. His hand reached instinctively for hers, and though she hesitated, she did not pull away. Tears welled in his eyes as the faint rhythm filled the room. For the first time in years, the proud, polished man could not contain his emotions. "That's our child," he whispered, his voice trembling. On the way home, he stopped by the market without a word, filling the basket with fruits and vegetables the physician had recommended. He cooked clumsily that evening, burning the first attempt, but he laughed softly at himself and started again. When he placed the plate in front of Serafina, he didn't ask for praise. He simply said, "You need strength. Let me help." Nights grew different too. When sickness woke her, he held her hair back, whispering gentle words until the nausea passed. When her body ached, he rubbed her shoulders in silence, careful and patient. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night to find him sitting by her side, his hand resting lightly on her stomach, whispering apologies not to her, but to the child she carried. Serafina remained guarded. She did not melt at his gestures, nor did she rush to forgive. But in her quiet heart, she began to notice the difference. These were not the actions of a man seeking applause. These were the actions of a man trying to rebuild, brick by fragile brick, what he had once torn down. And though she would not yet admit it, part of her wanted to believe he could. Serafina carried herself with quiet dignity, though the sorrow in her eyes had not yet lifted. She allowed Alaric's gestures, but she did not mistake them for redemption. Trust, once broken, was not rebuilt by fruit baskets or sleepless nights alone at her side. She needed more than help with her aches. She needed to know his heart had changed. Alaric seemed to understand. He did not press her for forgiveness, nor did he demand closeness. Instead, he showed up, consistently, humbly. When she grew too tired to cook, he prepared simple meals. When she couldn't reach her shoes, he knelt and tied them without a word. He drove her to the market, carried the bags, opened every door, not with the arrogance of a man performing, but with the gentleness of one learning how to love again. Yet Serafina's heart warred with itself. At night she sat awake, listening to his steady breathing beside her, wondering how she could ever trust that same breath not to whisper into another woman's ear again. She remembered Celestine's letter, the cruel fragrance still lingering in her mind. Could a man who had once strayed truly anchor himself once more? Or was this only guilt, a performance to soothe his conscience? One evening, she found him in the nursery, a room she had not yet dared to prepare. He stood by the window, holding a small stuffed bear in his hands, tears tracing silently down his cheeks. He did not notice her at first. His lips moved, whispering to the emptiness, "I promise, little one, I won't fail you the way I failed her." Serafina's breath caught. She stepped back before he could see her, retreating down the hallway with her heart pounding. Part of her ached at the sight, a man stripped of pride, speaking not to her, but to a child who could not yet hear. Another part of her remained cautious, reminding her that regret was not the same as change. Still, she could not deny it. There was something in his eyes, in the way he carried himself now, that was different from the man who once betrayed her. Her friends noticed too. "He follows you everywhere," one remarked softly. "He looks at you as if the world depends on it." Serafina smiled faintly, though her heart was not yet ready to answer. "We shall see," she said quietly. In her silence, Alaric continued his persistence, not with declarations but with deeds. And slowly, a crack began to form in the wall she had built, letting in a faint, fragile light. Alaric's devotion did not fade with time. If anything, it grew steadier, quieter, more deliberate. Each day he found new ways to serve without expectation, to stand close without pressing. When Serafina woke nauseous in the early hours, he was there with a cool cloth and whispered reassurances. When her back ached, he rubbed gently until she drifted back to sleep. He began to cancel meetings, shocking his associates, just so he could accompany her on walks through the garden, offering his arm when her steps slowed. Serafina noticed. She could not ignore the man who now rose early to brew her tea, who carried her books from room to room, who checked every corner of the nursery before she entered, as though guarding her from shadows. She kept her heart guarded, but her body betrayed her in moments, a small smile escaping when he knelt to tie her shoes, a softened gaze when she caught him speaking to the child in her womb. Still, trust came slowly. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she finally broke the silence. "Why now, Alaric? Why only when there's a child between us?" He looked at her, the flames reflecting in eyes wet with unshed tears. "Because I lost sight of what mattered. I thought success was measured in applause, in power, in women who made me feel invincible. But when I saw you holding our child, I realized I'd nearly destroyed the only real treasure I've ever had." Serafina studied him for a long time, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. "Words are easy. You gave her your words once too." "I know," he admitted. "That's why I will not ask you to believe me yet. I will show you, every day, for as long as it takes." Her eyes lowered, her heart torn between hurt and hope. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust again. But scars do not vanish overnight. And yet, something had changed. The anger that once burned so fiercely had cooled into sorrow, and sorrow was slowly giving way to something else, a fragile, trembling possibility. At night, when she lay awake, she found herself listening for his voice. More than once she caught him whispering into the quiet, speaking to the child as though she could hear, "Little one, I will never fail you. You will never doubt my love. Not the way your mother has." Serafina would close her eyes, pressing her hand over her heart, torn between pain and longing. For though she had every reason to close herself off forever, part of her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. The night arrived sooner than either of them expected. Serafina stirred from her sleep with a sharp cry, clutching her stomach. Pain rippled through her body, sudden and relentless. Alaric bolted upright, panic flashing across his face. "It's time," she gasped, her voice breaking. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in his arms, helping her dress, his hands trembling but steady enough to keep her upright. He guided her to the carriage, his heart pounding as he barked orders to the driver. The streets blurred past, but all he could see was her face, pale and strained with pain. He held her hand tightly, whispering again and again, "I'm here. I won't leave you. Not now, not ever again." At the hospital, hours stretched into eternity. Serafina's cries echoed through the halls as each wave of pain consumed her. Alaric stayed at her side, his once polished composure stripped away. He wiped the sweat from her brow, held her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, though his own tears streamed freely. "You're stronger than anyone I know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for every tear I ever caused you. Please, please hold on. For her, for us." Serafina's eyes found his between her cries, and for a fleeting second, she saw him, not the man of betrayal, not the man of arrogance, but the man she once loved, stripped of all pride, desperate only to keep her safe. And then, at last, the sound came, the piercing cry of new life. The physician lifted the small, fragile child and placed her in Serafina's arms. Her body trembled, her face wet with tears, but her eyes softened as she looked down at the tiny girl who had just entered the world. Alaric leaned closer, his breath catching as he gazed at his daughter for the first time. Her skin was delicate, her fists clenched, her cry fierce despite her size. He reached out with a shaking hand, his fingertips brushing against her tiny arm. The moment he touched her, something inside him broke. Tears poured down his face as he cradled her gently. "Amara Rose," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My little girl, you are my redemption. I don't deserve you, but I will spend every day proving I am worthy to be your father." The polished millionaire, the man who once believed he needed nothing but success, wept, openly in that small hospital room, undone by the weight of love he could no longer deny. Serafina, exhausted and fragile, watched through her tears. She saw him kiss the child's forehead with reverence, saw his shoulders shake with sobs. And though her heart remained guarded, a spark flickered, the faintest hope that perhaps change was possible after all. The days after Amara Rose's birth transformed Alaric in ways he never anticipated. He no longer saw wealth as his measure of worth, nor did he hunger for the applause of others. His world narrowed to a single room where his wife rested and his daughter slept in a cradle beside her. He hovered over the crib at night, whispering promises into the soft silence. "I will be better. I will never let you question my love. You will not grow up wondering if your father chose the world over you." His hand lingered gently on her tiny chest, rising and falling with each breath, as though anchoring him to the very rhythm of life itself. During the day, he took every role upon himself. He changed diapers clumsily at first, fumbling with the pins, laughing softly through his tears when Amara kicked her legs in. Protest. He learned to rock her to sleep, pacing the floor until his own legs trembled. When Serafina stirred in exhaustion, he pressed her back against the pillows and said gently, "Rest. I'll hold her." Serafina watched him, her heart torn. She had seen Alaric in his finest suits, commanding rooms with confidence. She had seen him betray her, his eyes clouded with weakness. But now she saw him differently, hair disheveled, sleeves rolled, whispering lullabies in the dead of night. It was not grandeur that defined him now, but humility. Yet her heart remained cautious. She carried too many scars to simply fall back into his arms. When he reached for her hand, she sometimes let him, other times pulled away, needing distance to breathe. He never protested. Instead, he bore her rejection quietly, as though each refusal was a consequence. He was willing to endure for the chance to earn her trust again. One evening, as she sat feeding Amara, she caught Alaric watching them with tears shining in his eyes. "She looks like you," he whispered. Strong, beautiful, untouchable. Serafina's throat tightened. "She deserves better than what you gave me." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "That's why I will spend the rest of my life proving that she has better. That you have better." The sincerity in his tone, the vulnerability etched across his face, unsettled her. For months she had steeled her heart against him. But now she saw a man stripped of pride, reshaped by the fragile weight of fatherhood. She did not forgive him then. But for the first time she felt the faint stirring of something she thought had been lost forever, the possibility of hope. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of their home was no longer dictated by boardrooms or dinner parties, but by the cries of a newborn and the quiet strength of endurance. Alaric no longer lived for accolades. He lived for the soft sigh of Amara Rose sleeping against his chest, for the way Serafina's tired eyes softened when she saw him pacing the nursery floor at dawn. One night, when the house was hushed and moonlight filtered faintly through the curtains, Alaric sat with his daughter curled in his arms. His voice shook as he whispered into the quiet, not realizing Serafina stood in the doorway watching. "Amara," he said, his tears dripping onto her blanket, "I was blind once. I thought love could be tossed aside and reclaimed whenever I pleased. I nearly lost your mother, and I nearly lost the chance to be worthy of you. But no more. From this night on, every breath I take belongs to protecting you and her. You are the proof that God gave me more grace than I deserved. I will never squander it again." Serafina's hand gripped the doorframe as her heart clenched. She had heard apologies before, words spun with charm and ease. But this was different. This was not spoken to her, not intended to impress. These were the raw confessions of a man stripped bare, clutching the most fragile treasure of his life. When he finally noticed her, his eyes widened, shimmering with vulnerability. "I meant every word," he said hoarsely. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I will live every day as if I'm trying to earn it." Serafina's eyes filled with tears. She stepped into the room, sat beside him, and laid her hand gently over Amara's tiny chest. For a long moment they said nothing, their fingers brushing as they touched their daughter together. The silence was not cold this time. It was tender, tentative, filled with the possibility of healing. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "I don't know if I can forget, Alaric, but maybe one day I can forgive." His breath caught, and he closed his eyes, letting her words sink deep. For him, it was not victory, but hope, the most precious gift he had ever been given. And as Amara Rose stirred softly in their arms, Serafina realized that the child was not only their daughter. She was the bridge, the proof that broken things could, with patience and humility, be made whole again. If you believe every child is a gift that can change lives, hit the share button. Someone needs this message today. Forgiveness was not instant. It could not be. The cracks in Serafina's heart ran too deep to be sealed by simple words. She carried the memory of the letter, the scent that haunted her dreams, the image of the man she loved choosing another's arms. Those scars did not vanish because a child was born, nor because Alaric wept. They lingered, reminding her that love, once broken, must be rebuilt carefully, brick by fragile brick. Alaric seemed to understand this. He did not demand absolution, nor did he try to sweep the past away. Instead, he lived as though every moment was a chance to prove himself. His apologies no longer came in speeches, but in actions. When she rose weary in the mornings, he was already in the kitchen, preparing her tea. When Amara cried through the night, he rose first, pacing the floor until her sobs quieted. When Serafina faltered, carrying the heaviness of doubt, he met her with patience, never pressing, never demanding what she was not yet ready to give. There were setbacks. At times, Serafina's anger resurfaced, sharp and raw. "How do I know you won't betray me again?" she once asked, tears streaming down her face. Alaric's answer was not defensive. His voice was steady, low, and full of sorrow. "You don't. All I can do is live each day as proof that I won't. Not because I fear losing you, but because I finally understand what love requires." It was humility like this, not arrogance, not persuasion, that began to chip away at the walls she had built. Neighbors noticed the shift. The once distant man who had been admired for his wealth now carried his daughter through the town square, smiling shyly when people remarked how fatherhood suited him. He no longer led with grandeur, but with gentleness. And when Serafina walked beside him, though her steps were still measured, her heart slowly began to ease. The journey was not about forgetting the betrayal. It was about choosing each day whether the past would dictate the future. For Serafina, that choice was still painful. But for the sake of Amara, and for the faint flicker of love she still carried, she was willing to let the process unfold. Alaric learned quickly that redemption was not built on grand declarations but on steady consistency. The man who once dazzled boardrooms with speeches now found his strength in silence, in doing the small things that mattered most. When Serafina washed the linens, he carried the baskets without being asked. When she walked through the garden with Amara in her arms, he bent down to pull weeds, sweat on his brow, not caring that his suit was soiled. When storms of doubt crossed her face, he did not rush to defend himself. Instead, he listened, nodded, and accepted her pain as something he had caused and must endure. At first, she remained guarded, watching him closely, searching for signs of pretense. But the pretense never came. His gestures were quiet, unannounced. He no longer looked at his phone during meals. He no longer disappeared into long nights with excuses. Instead, he lingered where she was, at the table, in the nursery, beside her on the porch. One evening, as she rocked Amara to sleep, Serafina felt his presence in the doorway. He didn't enter, he only watched. His eyes softened as he whispered, "I don't deserve this view, but I will never stop being grateful for it." Her throat tightened. She didn't reply, but in her heart, something stirred. Gratitude was not the language he once spoke. Ambition had been his constant tongue, pride his anthem. Now humility shaped every word. Another evening, he found her sitting by the fire, exhaustion weighing her shoulders. Without a word, he set a steaming cup of tea beside her. When she lifted her gaze, he met her eyes and said simply, "You don't have to carry everything alone." Tears welled in her eyes, not because the gesture was grand, but because it was gentle, thoughtful, consistent. Slowly, she began to let her guard down. She allowed him to hold her hand when they walked through the market. She leaned against his shoulder when fatigue overtook her. She even caught herself laughing once, a soft, reluctant laugh when Amara grasped his nose with her tiny fists and refused to let go. Alaric froze at the sound, drinking it in as though it were the most precious treasure. For him, her laughter was proof that there was still life in the love he had nearly destroyed. Bit by bit, trust was not spoken back into existence, it was lived back into being. Forgiveness did not come like a sudden sunrise. It came like dawn breaking slowly, first with shadows, then with glimmers of light that grew stronger each day. Serafina carried her pain as carefully as she carried her daughter. She had been wronged deeply, and her wounds were not erased by kind words or gentle gestures. Yet as months passed, she began to see a truth that softened her heart. Alaric was no longer the same man who betrayed her. He was reshaped by humility, stripped of pride, and anchored by love for their child. One evening, after laying Amara in her crib, Serafina lingered by the window, watching the lamplight flicker across the garden. Alaric joined her quietly, keeping his distance. His hands were folded before him, his head bowed slightly, no longer a man demanding affection, but one waiting with patience. She spoke first, her voice low and trembling. "You broke me, Alaric. You crushed the woman who once trusted you without question. There were nights I wanted to leave, nights I thought I could never look at you again without pain." His chest tightened, but he did not interrupt. She turned then, her eyes glistening but steady. "But I see the way you've changed. Not for appearances, not for applause." For her, she nodded toward the crib, and for me, "You have shown me day by day that your remorse is not hollow. And though the scars will remain, I refuse to let them dictate our future. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. I choose to forgive you, not because it is easy, but because it is harder to carry bitterness than it is to rebuild. Alaric's knees nearly gave way. He gripped her hand as though it were the only thing tethering him to the earth. Tears filled his eyes, spilling freely. Seraphina, I will never stop proving worthy of this choice. You have given me a gift I could never deserve. In that moment, the weight between them shifted. The wound did not vanish, but it no longer held power to destroy. Forgiveness had not erased the past, but it had opened the door to a future where healing could breathe. For Seraphina, forgiveness was not surrender. It was strength, the courage to see beyond betrayal and choose love once more. The air in their home slowly shifted. Where once silence hung heavy, now laughter began to return in quiet bursts. Amara's squeals, Seraphina's soft giggles, Alaric's tender chuckles as he held his daughter high above his head. The rooms, once filled with tension, now echoed with the fragile music of a family learning to live again. Trust was not fully restored overnight. Seraphina still carried her scars, and Alaric never pretended otherwise. But his humility, his persistence, and his daily choice to put her and Amara first became the new rhythm of their life together. One evening, as the three of them sat in the garden, Amara toddled unsteadily toward her father. Alaric scooped her into his arms, his eyes shining as she reached her tiny hand toward Seraphina. He looked at his wife, his voice low and reverent. Every time I see her, I'm reminded that love is not about never failing. It's about choosing to rise again, together. Seraphina's heart swelled. She reached out, laying her hand over his and Amara's. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel fear. She felt peace. Their evenings became sacred. Stories whispered to Amara as she drifted to sleep, shared glances across the table as they watched her discover the world, moments where they leaned into each other not out of obligation but out of choice. Alaric no longer sought power in the world outside. His fulfillment was here, in the quiet sighs of his wife resting against him, in the tiny heartbeat of his daughter sleeping between them. The man who once measured success by contracts and wealth now measured it by the strength of his family's bond. Seraphina knew that forgiveness did not erase the past, but it allowed them to write a different ending. She chose each day to walk forward, not because the road was easy, but because love was worth the courage it demanded. As they lay in bed one night, Amara nestled between them. Alaric whispered, "Thank you for giving me a second chance. You've taught me that forgiveness is not weakness, but the strongest act of love." Seraphina rested her head on his shoulder, her lips curving into a faint smile. "And you've taught me that change is possible, if a man is willing to fight for it." Their daughter stirred softly, her small hand gripping both of theirs at once, bridging what was once broken. In that moment they knew, love, though fragile, can survive betrayal, if nurtured by humility, consistency, and the courage to forgive. Would you give a second chance to someone who broke your heart? Let us know in the comments. Your story might inspire others. In the end, their story was not about wealth or betrayal, nor even about the trials that nearly tore them apart. It was about the choices that define love when it is tested. Alaric learned the hard truth: temptation carries a price far heavier than its fleeting pleasure. He had risked his marriage, his family, and the woman who had once given him her trust so freely. But through humility, through countless small sacrifices, he discovered what love truly demands, not indulgence, but devotion. Seraphina, too, faced a battle of her own. Forgiveness was not handed to her like a soft garment to slip into. It was a hard, deliberate choice, made not out of naivety, but out of strength. She chose not to let bitterness shape her daughter's future. She chose to rebuild, not because betrayal was excusable, but because love, real love, is courageous enough to give second chances. And in the center of it all was Amara Rose. Her tiny heartbeat became the rhythm that stitched a fractured bond back together. Her innocent hands bridged two broken hearts, reminding them both that sometimes the smallest among us carry the greatest power to heal. This story teaches us that love is not proven in moments of ease, but in the willingness to sacrifice when it is hardest. It reminds us that temptation, no matter how alluring, leaves scars that wealth and charm cannot erase. And above all, it shows that forgiveness, though costly, has the power to restore what once seemed beyond repair. Perhaps that is the message we must carry into our own lives. Love is not perfection. Love is choosing again and again, even after failure, to fight for the ones who matter most. So, As we close, let us return to the image we began with. Seraphina holding her newborn, whispering through her tears, "You'll never know the pain I've endured, but you will know love." That promise was not only for Amara. It was a promise to herself, to her husband, and to the life they were building anew. And maybe, in our own journeys, we too can make that choice, to love, to forgive, and to believe that even in brokenness, healing is possible. If this story touched you, don't just keep it. Like, subscribe, and share it so more people can find hope through these tales.